who this is kind of part of what we expect them to want, to get on and follow these important speakers that we have. So today we are really fortunate to have James Pennington here from Back Bay Mission, and Back Bay Mission is an organization that's been around for a long time, 100 years. And it is an organization, as long as certainly I've lived and worked on the Gulf Coast, it is a champion of social justice and really, in many, many ways, a leader in serving the community. And so we are very pleased to have James here. And with that, I will hand it off to you. Great.
So good to have you all here. I think I know most of you now, so it's all good. So we'll kind of take this. We'll see. We'll watch your faces and determine if you're engaged in the slides or not, right? So this is Sarah, and Sarah is our Director of Client Services. So she knows a lot more than I do, and she's prettier, so I'll let her do a lot of the speaking too, right? So I want to share a little bit before we begin about the history, because we are turning 100 years old this year. We have turned 100 years old, and we have had a brilliant history, as you shared, and I've only been there a little over a year and a half. And I think one of the things that I found most engaging, I think, when I stepped into the role as executive director, was the Bloody Sunday and our involvement in desegregating the beaches, right? And it came on the last one where our executive director showed up and a few other volunteers, and they were kind of the, quote, white faces in the crowd, right? As a part of that desegregation of the beaches. And then I found out the Back Bay Mission was a place for the Freedom Riders. They stopped, and I found out we had a cross burned on our property, and we were very involved with the NAACP organizing at Back Bay Mission. And so all of that really kind of, for me, was exciting. And because I've kind of seen myself as a lifelong learner around civil rights and equity and justice for what we might call, and I don't really like the word, but it's the word we use for marginalized populations, right? Populations that don't have access. So for me, Back Bay Mission has been doing a lot of that work here in the Gulf. And it came out of the United Church of Christ. We used to have 2 to 3 United Churches of Christ down here until the early 70s. And because these churches were involved and engaged in civil rights and in the Wade-in, the churches closed down one by one until the mid-70s. The last church closed, primarily because back in those times, right, if you were involved in this and trying to create social change, you got fired. Right. And so many of the members of those churches were fired. They couldn't get other employment on the coast. And those were tough times. Right. And it's part of our history that we acknowledge. So those churches kind of disappeared. So we don't get funding from the United Church of Christ. All of our funding is basically generosity of people that support us all over the country. And then folks here on the coast, and then some grants from HUD and Gulf Coast Community Foundation and a variety of places. So we really believe that collaboration is the key too. And I think the interesting thing about Back Bay and its 100-year history is we gave birth to Coastal Family Health, to Center for Nonviolence, to Mississippi AIDS Project, Task Force, and a whole bunch of organizations that spun off from Back Bay Mission, primarily to serve underserved populations in our community. So Back Bay began serving the fisher folks who were refugees or the newest immigrants to the coast to work in the shrimping and oyster industry. And they were mostly Slovakian. And they moved here, right, because they wanted a better life, as most migrants do or immigrants do. And what they found is they got here, and of course you come with the clothes on your back and maybe a small suitcase, right? And they were working in this industry, but their children were also working in the industry because they all needed to work in the industry to be able to afford their new life here, right? So they were living in poverty. The kids were going without shoes, and we have some images and pictures we wish we could have put on here, but we'll get that next time, of the children actually working in those industries, standing on shelves, right, with bare feet. And so these churches said, we need to do something for these new migrants, these new immigrants. And they basically provided shoes initially, clothing, education. They got buses and took them to their Sunday school classes, right? Because they felt these kids need to learn to read and write. And they weren't going to school because they're working in the shrimping and oyster industry. And then eventually medical, because they realized there was no access to medical. And there's a whole variety of services that they eventually provided for these migrants, but then turned into an organization that really began to serve people that were poor. And then especially to people that were homeless or unsheltered. So we've kind of moved and looked at the needs of the community, and have been nimble and have evolved, and we do what we need to do to meet the needs of the community. And I think one of the biggest programs, and I'll let Sarah talk a little bit more about her programming, but one of our biggest programs that's come out of this was a response to Camille, where we started doing housing rehab or repair, roofs, and it's really moved and morphed into really working with people who are living in poverty, who don't have the resources to do home repair. And if they don't do these repairs, their homes may become unlivable. And so we go in with about 1,000 volunteers a year that come down from most of our northern states, and help us to do this work with our construction manager and a couple other staff. And then we have a program that's called Energy Wise, which we go into homes of people that are living at the level of poverty. We found actually, we just started doing a lot in Moss Point, mostly Moss Point, Golf Court, Gaston Point. And we found many people in Moss Point that have lived without air conditioning for some time because their units were broke. So in partnership with the Gulf Coast Community Foundation and Mississippi Power, we're able to replace those units, air conditioning, heating, and also help their house to be more energy efficient. So it lowers their bills, and so they actually have a better quality of life. And actually, it probably improves their health. We found that most often, right? Because we oftentimes at the same time will pull out carpet, which holds a lot of allergies. So it's been really a fantastic program. And that's really been happening since Camille. And then basically our property was devastated during Katrina. And so we were able to rebuild basically use of volunteers. And that's when the Micah Day Center came into place. So do you want to hear about the myths? We'll run through those quick. And the facts of poverty? Okay, so that was a short history. Any questions about that? I could talk for hours on that.
So it's good to hear that history.
Yeah.
If I could just ask, as you're presenting, you're actually blocking.
Oh, I am, aren't I? Oh, geez.
It's a sticker.
I'm unaware. Oh, there's the sticker on the floor. Oh, I'm just usually unaware of my space. So anyway, so this is kind of myths of poverty and homelessness. Myth number one, people who are homeless should just get a job or they'd not be homeless. Of course, right? Makes sense. Doesn't make sense.
Our number one.
So that's our number one. You know, when we talk about homelessness with folks, in fact, I was at Mississippi Public Health. I presented up in Hattiesburg, and about 250 folks that work in public health. And I got 3 different responses at the beginning of my presentation that were similar to this. They should just get a job. There's lots of jobs available, right? But there's so many barriers to employment. And go ahead. We'll go off the slide.
So many people who are homeless do have jobs. I'm sure you guys are aware of our minimum wage in Mississippi,
7 what?
$7.50, I believe it is, and it's been the same since the 90s. I think it is. So sometimes they have 2 and 3 jobs, and the National Coalition for Homeless estimates as many 40 to 60 people who are experiencing homelessness nationwide are employed. However, a paycheck does not necessarily solve homelessness or the challenges. So we actually have a lot of individuals that access our services that have income, Social Security, disability, mostly. We have a lot of Social Security or retirement, but the average is no more than $850 a month. And we have a housing crisis on the Gulf Coast with livable housing and livable wages. So we're seeing that even if you do have a job or a paycheck, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're housed. The jobs that they can get aren't livable wages. And then you have to deal with the mental health, the addiction that comes as a result of the mental health. And most jobs don't have mental health days where you can kind of work through some of the issues that cause homelessness. So yeah, this is the biggest myth that we see at Back Bay Mission. And we're taught the whole time from childhood up, when you go to get a job, you want to look your best, you present yourself your best, you come in clean. It's really hard to present yourself your best when you're haven't had a shower, you don't know where you're going to sleep. You got to make sure you get that 11 o'clock lunch because there's going to be nothing else for the day. So there are a lot of barriers to getting a job or retaining a job when you're homeless.
Yeah, and I think that's what we see. So Sarah directs the Micah Day Center, which is a drop-in center for people experiencing homelessness, or we say unsheltered. And we call them guests. We don't call them
Clients.
clients. We have case managers that work with them. And I think there's huge barriers to employment to begin with for somebody who's been homeless even for a year. Right?
Identification.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a huge
If
one.
you don't have a driver's license, you've lost it, you've misplaced it,
Can't
or you've
afford
been
to get it.
evicted. Yeah.
And tents aren't waterproof and neither are backpacks. So oftentimes their documentation that they need to get an ID are destroyed. And then once we do get everything that they need, there's no transportation to either DMV. So we have to drive them or they have to get a ride or walk. So the places that they need sometimes to be sustainable or move forward are not accessible by public transportation. So that's a huge barrier that we're seeing on the Gulf Coast. Specifically is that there is not access to the things that they need to become sustainable. So oftentimes we just drive in our personal cars so they can get an ID and get a job. Now, if they do have a job or they're looking for housing, we buy their IDs, we can purchase their birth certificates, we help them get their social security cards. We've partnered with both police departments. They're able to get us a face sheet from the police department that Social Security will actually accept. So that's been a huge development in the last month that the police department can actually go with them and we'll give you a social security card. Because the unfortunate thing is you have to have a social security card to get your birth certificate. You have to have a birth certificate to get your social security card, and you have to have both to get an ID. So it can be very frustrating, and who helps you navigate that? And that's what we have our case managers for, to help navigate through the system that can be very frustrating. So.
Yeah. Some people choose to be homeless.
This is partially true.
Partially true, some do.
Some myth and some truth to this.
Yeah, we assume that about 85, well, I guess we don't assume, we kind of know that about 85% of our folks have mental health issues, diagnosed, but unmedicated, because if you're living on the streets, you're more worried about a lot of other things than your medication, right? And we do have a program where we can give people their medication, but be compliant in your mental health medications is really challenging. So in particular, yes, some people do choose. It's a small minority. But we have like some folks that come to the Micah Day Center and we ask them, do you want to be housed? And their answer is, I don't want to lose my community. I don't want the responsibility, right? And I think part of it is it's mental health, it's emotional health, it's spiritual health. It's all of that kind of wound up. If you've been homeless for any length of time, it's just kind of life is, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah. This is dangerous. And I've come across both. So I've been at Back Bay for a little over 5 years.
She's a champion. She knows her stuff.
And I did housing in the outreach. So I've been in the woods. I've asked people housing questions. We have a lot of veterans, and for whatever reason, they're very disconnected from the VA by choice. And some have PTSD. So a lot of times I'm seeing veterans in the woods that is exactly where they want to be. And we have to respect that. We've had individuals access the Micah Day Center, females that for 5 years, I've tried to get them to get housed and they don't want that. We have to respect where they're at in their walk and continue to have conversations and build that trust. But this is a dangerous myth. It does let us ignore the trauma of homelessness and neurobiological effects trauma has on humans. Being homeless is stressful, humiliating, exhausting, and dangerous in its day-to-day existence. Some of the things these people go through on the streets is terrifying. And a lot of times we say, well, why don't you just get on your mental health medication? Well, let's go take your medicine. But especially women, who we see a lot of, are afraid to take their mental health medications because it makes them sleepy, it makes them vulnerable, and they feel like there's a high level of sexual trauma on the streets with women. So a lot of women are unmedicated for that reason. And a lot of them stay unmedicated because their medicine is stolen or they don't have the money to purchase it. So this is a big issue. The people that are, we say, choosing to stay homeless, there's more to it than that sometimes. And if you didn't have trauma prior to being homeless, you do now. Because it can be very scary. There's snakes. We found snakes in the woods.
I stood right over a snake in the woods, right, yeah, between my
A
legs.
cottonmouth.
Cottonmouth.
And it just picked its head up and I'm like,
Move slowly away, yeah. Yeah.
So,
But those are the realities. Yeah.
and you know, and there's no safe places to camp. I know we service all of Harrison County. So we do outreach in both. And I'll say we've gone to camps that are very nice. You go to camps, you know there's children living in those camps. We know that there's a woman
See toys.
in Gulfport that has at this point, a 2-week baby. We can't find them. We know she gave birth in the woods. We literally can't find her because people don't access service out of fear of losing their children, especially women and children. So
Yeah.
it is, and it's humiliating. Who wants to come and say, I don't have anything and these are my children? So, and we see this a lot in the Vietnamese community. it's a cultural thing that they don't want to access services or ask for help. So we have to be very mindful of culture as well, when they do come in and ask for help finally.
So we're only through a few of these, but we'll somehow get there. People who are homeless are dangerous, violent, and or criminals. Honestly, we have seen an uptick in unsheltered people being a bit more assertive and aggressive. And we've had conversations with business people. We had a town hall that we invited the whole community to, and we're gonna have a second town hall to talk about that. But, yeah, so camping is it's not a crime,
No.
right? But people who are homeless, break the law sometimes merely being unhoused.
Trespassing
Yeah,
and
so-
loitering.
Yeah.
But we're seeing this, I think the aggressiveness we're seeing is newly homeless
Yeah.
people. With the economy and things, people are losing their houses. They're very frustrated. There's a lot of, the anger isn't really directed at us. It's just, I think, a frustration about the system. But we are seeing more and more newly homeless that are being very aggressive. That has been an issue.
Yeah, at our day shelter too, so. Yeah, housing should come with conditions like being clean and sober. We
We don't prescribe to that.
we don't prescribe to that. The model we use, am I taking your statement?
No, go ahead.
The model we use is Housing First, which is basically a HUD model. Scattered site. We're not really sold on the scattered site. We think people should be really housed in a location that has kind of a service-rich environment. So somebody that can provide mental health, somebody that can provide therapy, somebody that can provide all the services they need, right? Kind of in one stop and also living there, because especially with mental health issues.
Yeah.
And so experience tells us, right, that it's really about empowering them, but scattered site housing doesn't really work with this Housing First model. And we don't have any stipulations or requirements. You don't have to be clean to get housed. You can be abusing substances and get housed, right? But what we do is we try to use a harm reduction model, which is reducing the harm, reducing the use. And we actually have a covert needle exchange program to try to help people stay healthy, right? And reduce the harm.
Yeah.
So that eventually they can get off the medications, drugs, or whatever it is they're addicted to.
And we find stability sometimes brings this. Sometimes they're ready to access services because they have a stable place to go to.
Yeah.
And you build trust when you house them with no conditions. Like, I'm here for you when you need me. So that helps.
Yeah. And the big challenge with housing folks is if you haven't been housed for a while and suddenly you're moved into an apartment, you don't know how to be a neighbor. You don't know to put the mayonnaise in the refrigerator.
Oh, yeah.
Simple things like that.
Housing is
right?
the easy part.
You can't sleep on the bed because the bed is odd and uncomfortable. It's too soft because they've been sleeping on the floor. So you have to really, it's the life skills that we all take for granted. Like, how do you run the dishwasher, right?
Yeah. We had to teach them the other day.
Yeah. So that's their reality because they've lived without for so long.
Yeah.
And we just housed somebody, that was homeless for 10 years?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've already talked about that. Okay. Oh, that's one of my favorites.
People experiencing homeless are lazy.
That's just not true. It's very frustrating to me.
Yeah.
We get this a lot. And this is something I think we struggle with as an organization. When do we move from being the assistance they need to holding their hand too much? So this is something that all of our case managers, we have to be very mindful of and constantly check to make sure that we're not creating a situation that's going to encourage them to remain homeless. Yes, we have all these services, but here's the benefits of being housed or moving on or whatever that looks like. But in theory, this doesn't.
And this is Loaves and Fishes feeding on our campus. That's our admin building, but also provide services on that. Our food pantry over here is our Micah Day Center where folks can come to get a shower, to get services. And then behind us is where we have a building where our volunteers stay. And we also have veterans housing. We have 8 units near Lee's Groceries where homeless veterans are able to live, and we work with the vets on that. So that kind of gives you a little bit of schematic.
A lot going on. So it's just an essential. I don't think that food and shelter, they're a must. They're a need. So we offer that. And Loaves and Fishes, I think, has been on our campus for 6-8 months now.
Since January.
Since January. So I think they're going to have a place of their own soon. But I have enjoyed having them there because they used to be way down on Water Street, which sometimes the homeless would have to choose between a shower or getting their lunch because the showers just continually run, starting at 8 o'clock in the morning. So I've loved actually having them there. And we're bringing some more of these things, like recovery. We're looking to get addiction specialists, mental health specialists. We have two Mississippi health workers that we're hiring. They should be on by the end of the year.
Yeah, that the public health is going to basically cover their expenses, their salary, benefits. Really thankful about that.
Do you know where Loaves and Fish's new location is going to?
Yeah, Judge Sequel.
Very
Their
close.
house, very close.
Yeah, so you go down Porter and make a right. Yeah, I think it's within a half a mile from Back Bay.
Yeah.
Money.
So how much time do we have left?
They're fine.
You're fine, we're flexible. You're, okay.
Okay. So any questions about this homelessness before we go into poverty, which are obviously tied?
So,
No questions are
I have questions.
on about either.
but obviously you depend upon other partners, you have some housing of your own. Why do you not have more, housing that you Back Bay runs?
Well,
One.
funding. We have the veterans housing, and then actually we have Gulf Coast Community Housing Initiative, which is a part of Back Bay. A
Okay.
bit of an arm that's never spun off, so it's still in-house.
Okay.
And Everett is the executive director
Mhm.
of that. And most of our volunteers do work we did a couple of new builds in North Gulfport that we did during COVID. So they were intended to be sold to first-time home buyers, low income, right, affordable housing. And we can get people in those. The challenge was that by the time we didn't have any volunteers coming for a year and a half, 2 years almost, and they're still just trickling back in. So we had to use outside sources. So we had sold them almost at market, and then what we made off of those, we put back into our housing recovery program. We're building a small 2-bedroom, 1-bath house in in Gaston Point, and we're going to be building some others there. Part of its funding is, it requires grants from HUD, and HUD is so restrictive. So we don't have, like here on the coast, we really don't have any housing specifically for unsheltered folks.
Right.
We use traditional apartments, and oftentimes the apartments they go into, because we have a limit, right? HUD says, this is how much you can spend in an apartment. The apartments tend to be, they wouldn't be places most of us would probably choose to live.
Our biggest housing is right here around the corner. So I know you know where I'm talking about, over here by the airport.
Oh, okay.
That is the place we put, and people have a history and a record. So with housing being so stringent now, people can be picky about who they house. So any felonies, anything from 20 years ago, it's very difficult to find housing. We would love that, but we envision an apartment complex where they're there and the services are there and Back Bay runs it, but we get a lot of pushback and not in my backyard. Like, who's going to want it?
Right.
So a lot of it is getting people to buy into the idea that it's necessary
Yeah.
and vital to people. It's vital to health, really.
Well, we have 600,000 people any given time on the streets in the United States. And by the way, we're number 10 on the largest homeless populations, right, in this country. We're talking Nigeria like it's number 1. We're number 10. I don't get it. I don't understand it, because it would cost a lot less to get people housed in these housing apartment complexes with service-rich settings than it would to continue, right? All this,
Yeah.
these cycles. And on the coast, probably Mississippi has about 1,800 people homeless on any given night. And then the coast has over 200. We fight over that. We think each month there's about 50 in and 50 out. So it's cyclical, right? When you house somebody, somebody else goes homeless. So you had your hand up.
Well, yeah, I have a few questions, so I think I'm gonna just spit them all out and you pick which one. So just to clarify, that scattered housing is a HUD principle that you don't ascribe to, and that basically puts people without the cluster of services.
So we're kind of forced into that. HUD will allow a single site. We just don't have one. So if we were to build one, it would be still funded through HUD, but we just don't have a single site. So we scatter, because we also don't want to create homeless communities inside of apartment complexes either, because that can be an issue. So we try to scatter them, but then, like if you're in Biloxi House, the free mental health is almost a 2-hour bus ride, but then you got to get your medical care, which is over here, and then the other parts in D'Iberville. So they kind of go everywhere rather than coming to them, which we know statistically has a better outcome for the client. So it's not that HUD won't allow us, we just don't have a permanent, we don't have a building that we can do single site entry. And it's very popular in big cities, single site entry is really popular.
So some of the things we're looking at as a collaborative, right, with Center for Nonviolence and with several other organizations is potentially a motel hotel that's vacant right now that we could turn into a service-rich environment. We're envisioning tiny homes. We thought we were going to be using the Mercy Cross property. That's a bit up for grabs now. They'd be tiny bedrooms on wheels, really, so that we could get them out of that flood zone. But it would give people that transitional housing. So let's say you're homeless. You've lived on the streets for 6 to 8 to 10 months. You know, you kind of need to get back on your feet. You're not really comfortable right now going into an apartment. So this tiny home would be kind of a transitional space, give you the life skills you need to then move on, right? Because it's pretty close to Back Bay. It's like a couple blocks. So those are some ideas we have, and we're going to probably apply for some funding to build something. But we don't have anything for overnight, and that's where the challenge comes in, right? And it's mostly NIMBYism, not in my backyard. So we have some options. Yeah, your other questions.
Well, the home, for instance, she built in Gaston Point. Gaston Point is a well-established, older, wonderful neighborhood in many respects. So that home was just kind of integrated in.
Yeah, strangely enough on Dixie Avenue, yes. And we've got 2 rentals there too, that are rent to own. The individuals that are in them haven't been quite ready to own. I think there's some anxiety and fear about that, right? Because then when something breaks, you got to have the money to fix it, right? Home repairs. And those of you who are homeowners kind of realize that it's not like you can call your apartment complex and say, hey, come and fix my air conditioner. So I think, yeah, those are some of the challenges. And we've been really intentional with Gaston Point because it's a neighborhood that's has quite a bit of unused property and actually buildings that are air properties that were passed down from generation to generation that have fallen into disrepair. Yeah, so it is a brilliant, amazing community. I mean, it has this history of being a lot of the educators from the Black community living there, right? And as they've aged, and then some of their children haven't taken over the homes. It's kind of, we had a big air property event there that drew about 100 individuals from Gaston Point to talk about what are the legal ramifications, how do you write up the paperwork, what do you do, right? And we had some lawyers that came down from Jackson from the Center for Justice to do that. So we do that kind of continuing activism work too. So other questions?
Well, I'm interested in hearing, and if you want to wait until the end of your presentation, that's really for your. I'm interested in hearing, for instance, the scenario of this person that just was in homelessness for 10 or was in homeless for 10 years and just transition that person or helps transition that person. So
Yeah.
I'm interested in hearing that story of how these things happen.
Well, she's the one that holds those great stories. I only hear about them. And I get to meet the people
Yes.
because I kind of hang out in our parking lot and at Loaves and Fishes and inside Mike a Day. So, but she knows them really deeply and intimately because she's been doing this rehousing program.
Yeah, so he actually had a stroke. So what we do is anytime, we actually sit around a table every Wednesday with a bunch of partnering agencies.
And this is relatively new. This is
Yeah.
kind of something we thought
Yeah.
needed to happen. All we're kind of working in our silos
Yeah, we don't want
in
to.
this field. Now we don't do that anymore.
No, we don't work in a
But
vacuum.
collaborate.
So we bring the 2 police departments together, Open Doors, Mental Health Association, Pine Belt Mental Health, MCERT team, CIT people, like all the crisis teams. And what we do is sit around and we talk about who we're seeing on the streets. Because I see these people every day. So you can call Open Doors and say, I'm experiencing homelessness. But it's very different when you're on the ground because I can say anything over the phone. That doesn't make it true. So when we identify people, and this individual had been coming for a while, and he had recently had a stroke. So he was really having a lot of health problems. So what we do is we do an assessment called a VIASPDAT. It's not the only thing we do, but we do a VIASPDAT. What that does is it gives us a number at the end. And anything over 10 means you're highly vulnerable. And we want to make sure that we are getting those people housed as fast as we can. So he would be more vulnerable than a healthy 25-year-old on the street. So we want to make sure we're getting people off the streets. So he was identified as having had a stroke. We went to the table with it. We have several housing programs at Back Bay. So kind of when we're talking about an individual, how long do they need? What do they need to be sustainable? This individual has no income, no health insurance, recently had a stroke, isn't close to having disability. So he needs more than 6 months, but less than permanent supportive housing, which has no time limit on it. We need to get him sustainable. So he was identified through Back Bay Mission. We brought him to the table. Open Doors makes the referrals to us. So we asked for this referral. And then Mimi, who is our new case manager she does permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing, which is what he's in. She found him, and I think in under 2 weeks, she had an apartment for him. The grants don't pay for things like cooking utensils and beds and couches and furniture. So she put a need out. She got everything that she needed through local church organizations.
So HUD doesn't pay for that? But
It
they'll pay
permits for
for
housing only.
an empty apartment, which is
Yeah.
amazing. to me.
Yeah, they won't buy you a couch. So here's your apartment, enjoy the floor. So it's really a bizarre thing. I don't understand the federal government on
Not
that.
trying to be mean to HUD or anything. But very grateful, right?
So he will be able to stay in this program a maximum of 2 years, which is plenty of time to help him be sustainable. But he has no idea how to file a disability claim. So she went in, she had to teach him how to use his dishwasher, how to create a community with other people. How do you be a good tenant? How do you create a budget?
I do not invite all of your
Don't invite all
unsheltered
your
friends in.
That's the quickest way to get evicted here, is to let everybody come take a shower and sleep on your floor. So we're working through that with him now. He calls every single day. Every single day. And not only does he call every day, he walks back to Back Bay Mission every day. And he's housed by the mall. And he walks all the way to Back Bay Mission every single day because he misses his community. He calls the caseworker if she doesn't call, he gets so devastated. He gets so upset about that. So he's feeling very isolated. So we're starting to work through building a community. So what we actually talked about with the apartment complex is we're going to be housing several people. I think she has like 6 referrals right now. Can we put them in the same building and so that they have their community with them? Because the other individuals that we're actually housing are from Back Bay Mission. He knows who they are. And this way they'll still have a community and not feel so isolated. So 10 years he's been homeless, no criminal background. He has an alcohol problem, which he says he does not have. So we're not ready to have that conversation, and that's okay. And we don't tell him to stop drinking. We just say, hey, you got to pay your electric this month. So let's put that amount of money away. But you still have this amount of money and you can do what you want with it, but let's have that conversation. So we're teaching him life skills. We used to have Families First. I don't know if y'all remember Families First on the Gulf Coast. Oh, they were wonderful. They used to come and teach life skills. So we would go to our apartments and I would identify issues I saw repetitively, leaving your doors unlocked, not being on budget, things like that. And then we would bring them in monthly and have life skill classes. So now it's up to the case managers. We're doing that ourselves now. And it was really valuable because, I took a man grocery shopping every month for 6 months. And we took him in because they used to just not be able to get food stamps if you were a felon here. So we would buy their food. And I swear I would take him. She was so funny. I just love this man. I would take him shopping and he would go in and I said, all right, we got to get a month's worth of food. He's like, all right. And he came back with his buggy and he had like pickles, pig's feet, Kool-Aid, and sugar. And I thought, well, that is what are you going to do with that for a whole month? He's like, well, I love pig's feet. Well, that's great, but that's not enough for 30 days. So,
It's a lot of pigs.
it's a lot of pig. He loved them. And I remember one time they busted open in my car. That was the worst smell. So I would walk him up and down every aisle. I did this for 6 months. I took this man grocery shopping up and down every aisle for 6 months. It took that many months. And then I came and picked him up. It was like the proudest moment as like a mom, like my kids are growing up. So I picked him up and he's like, I have my list. He had written in a crayon. I had no idea what it said, but he could understand it. So we went to the grocery store and he said, I can do this on my own. I said, well, I'll be up here when you're done. He came up, he had 30 days worth of food. He had his bags to freeze his meat in. Of course, now they allow you to get food stamps as a felon, so we don't do it anymore. But it took 6 months to learn that skill. So that's kind of sometimes the level of interaction we have to have with clients. Like from that to some people they're fine. You put them in an apartment, they're good to go. You hear from them once a month as required, and that's all they need from us. But in our permanent supportive housing, which you have to be chronically homeless with a disabling condition, we find that they need a lot of help because they either have severe mental health or severe disabling conditions that drugs and alcohol are a disabling condition under HUD. So, I had a man that had unmedicated, he was diagnosed, unmedicated schizophrenia and a methamphetamine addiction. And in one leg. And I always say that because I found him one day on top of a playground. And I never know how he got up there, but he was up there with a stick trying to beat the maintenance man. And I dealt with him every day, 7 days a week, even on my off days. I would call him and tell him to take his medicine because he thought I was undercover, with the CIA, and he thought I was great. So I was like, yeah, I am. So you gotta take your medicine. So we would
Yeah,
call.
number of the folks we work with are delusional, right?
Yeah, and sometimes we just I say feed into the delusions, but sometimes if that's what I need to get you to take your medicine, yes, I work undercover for the CIA. And they said, you have to take your medicine if you want to keep helping with the investigation, because he was helping us with the investigation. I don't know what that was, but that's the level of mental health we're dealing with and in some of our housing programs. So sometimes apartment complexes are not the right choice because they go and they do things that don't make sense to other people and they end up getting evicted or worse, hurt. And that has been, we've seen that several. I had a woman almost beat to death with a metal pipe in her apartment, blood splatters on the wall, because she had a severe mental illness and was irritating the other neighbor. So who also had a severe mental illness. So that's sometimes why we don't house so many people close together, because one was housed with Mental Health Association and one was housed with us. And then together it was combative. So did that answer your question? It was kind of a long way of answering. I'm sorry.
Another question? No? Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
You mentioned the situation in the United States. We have the tempos. What about Mississippi specifically? I was curious if you could talk about the situation in Mississippi, about if there's any additional challenges that people in Mississippi face compared to other regions.
Yeah, definitely. I think overall, since I moved here from Arizona and Mississippi and Alabama and Louisiana always fight for the bottom. And I think because poverty, our economics, wage, all that really feeds into this, because a lot of people are on the edge of homelessness. And like I said, it's about 2,000 people that are homeless, considered homeless, that we know of on any given night in Mississippi. Is that high compared to some other places? No, but compared to our number of people who live here, yes. So I think the barriers in Mississippi, to be honest, well, maybe you should talk to those.
We have a
I
lack.
grew up in Mississippi, by the way, so I can claim that. I grew up in northern Mississippi, right?
But I see a lack of adequate health care, a lack of mental health resources, but I think that's nationwide. I don't think that's just a Mississippi thing. And then when you look at a community, you want it, by the way, our economic strengths are one below Flint, Michigan. So that's telling, right? Okay, so when you're looking at a pyramid, you want the jobs growing up here, the high paying jobs, to grow. So ours is flipped, right?
It's a low paying
Our
job.
low paying jobs are growing and there's not enough, it's not a livable wage. You have moms working 3 and 4 jobs that cannot pay for their children. And, you start to make people who receive $850 a month in income get $30 a month in food stamps. They say you make too much money. So there seems to be this myth that it's not a myth. When people start to do better, they don't have time to get their feet under them because they just take all these things that have been helping them get to where they're at away from them, from the government. So unfortunately, our pyramid is upside down. And they're jobs that don't pay enough for livable wages, or the jobs that are growing. We see a lot of food industry jobs, a lot of casino jobs, which is great. That's wonderful. But we need to get some of these high paying jobs.
Yeah.
We need to talk about livable wages and food insecurities. And it's a big issue here on the Gulf Coast. I don't think it's just the Gulf Coast, but those are the things I've seen since I've been here. And we were on the business council thing, the master's leadership program, and that is what they identified as being one of our main issues, that our pyramid is upside down and our economic strengths are right with Flint, Michigan, which is shocking to me, I think, when I heard that, because we think Flint, Michigan, we're like, wow, bottom of the barrel, right? Mississippi's right there. So it was a really shocking
Yeah,
thing.
and we partner with Ingalls as much as we can, and Ingalls they want to employ, people that are right out of the gate, right? We'll teach you how to be a welder, but the problem is getting people there and then finding housing for them there. We actually, and this didn't pan out because it was right during COVID, because we weren't using our mission house, which has 2 sides that have bunk beds. So we have 50 bunk beds, 25 on each side for volunteers to come in, right? And we were going to loan that to folks coming down from the Delta who were unemployed or underemployed to learn job skills at Ingalls, right? So we partnered with Ingalls. They could stay there and then they would get a van and take them back and forth. But it was right during COVID. Folks were afraid, and so they didn't move forward with that. But the challenge is getting people there, right? Like Ingalls can give you a livable wage. You got to be physically able to do it, but it's a livable wage. You just got to be able to know how to use a hammer. So I think that's part of it.
We have one of the lowest education rates.
Yeah,
in the
and then
US.
we have a brain drain here where folks leave once they get their education, right? like most of my family members, well, my nephews and nieces, my youngest family members, some have moved to Colorado, some have stayed here. But oftentimes it's just the challenge of getting a really good livable wage, especially in Northeast Mississippi around Boonville, and then I have some family in Laurel. So those are places where I don't know, once you're in that poverty cycle, and even if you have a poverty mindset, we talk about, we have a program that helps people out of poverty, right? And works with a poverty mindset, but you got to kind of change the mindset. And so I think that's also part of the challenge in Mississippi. And I personally, coming back, I love it here. I'm here for good. And I think we have some of the most hospitable people in the nation. You know, and I've had to travel around a lot with my work, but so we have so much that's good. But I think part of it also, to be honest, is perception, how people perceive Mississippi. And we kind of take that on ourselves. And so I think we here need to learn, how do we thrive, right? And then we need to get people in offices that are going to actually advocate for people, right? Like here, you know, better life, content living on government benefits. No, we need government benefits to get people to a better place. I don't know, did that answer that question?
Yeah.
It's
I
very
think
complex.
It's a complex. Yeah, and in Mississippi, so I'm not from Mississippi, I'm from Florida. It's such a different, and I've lived all over the US and other countries. It's such a different, it's been really interesting. And, you know, I call myself younger. I'm younger, and I've considered getting my PhD, and then I consider what opportunities there are in South Mississippi, and it doesn't make any sense for me. You know, yeah, it doesn't make any sense, right? So I have 2 masters, and it's like, what do you do with it here, right? So I think people are pursuing education, but then people are recruiting them to go to other states. So we're losing some of the really great minds in Mississippi that are coming out of our colleges, but aren't staying here because what do you do with it here? So, I mean, there's so much involved in this, and I don't know how you overcome.
So when you have 2 master's degrees, you become director of services for Back Bay Mission, right?
But I don't need a PhD.
Yeah,
It's
she
just
doesn't get the highest pay,
No.
but she gets to advocate too.
I love
Like she's an
job.
excellent advocate, right?
Mhm.
And we do value and appreciate her degrees, you know.
This was prior to this job. This had nothing to do
Yeah.
with my job in fact. But it is something that people consider here, and it is something that we talked about with the business councils that our talent is leaving Mississippi, and how do we get them back? We need to get out of old school factory ideas. Like we need to reinvent what South Mississippi could look like. Like we could reinvent ourselves. We have water and so many opportunities.
It's amazing.
What kind of businesses do you think are needed? What kind of business growth?
Mm.
You're saying, you said it's upside down. What is the,
Well,
what
we
is
have,
we're looking at businesses and which ones are needed?
we have a new coding academy here, which is way cool, right? It's right around the corner from us, across from Giant.
Yeah, so they're saying that robots will replace workers. So how do we train people to work in that field, right? So if you need to learn how to fix the robot that's cooking the food, right? So how do we encourage that kind of growth? Because the rest of the world is moving, like we're technologically advancing, but we're still doing the same things here. So I think technology is going to be a really big thing in South Mississippi. And I think we need to get on that bandwagon at some point, because at some point machines they're going to take over a lot of our jobs. They already are. Most factories, they're saying there's one person, they fix the machine, it lays off 10 to 15 people who are doing that job. So I think we're going to see that. I think there's some new things coming, I know, over further that way.
Yeah, GeoJob is a international organization that's headquartered here now. That few of you probably know about, David Hansen. So those are the kind of people we need to, you know, people that are imaginative and dreamers. I know the presentation last Friday by a couple of guys that said they're kind of dreaming, right? But we need dreamers to imagine what we can be and who we can be. And you went to that Flame, not Flame, what do I call it? Flame Ignite.
Yeah.
So, and you found out that what, in the next,
So we were told in one of the presentations that, and it was actually Edwards who presented it, who he used to chair the the Gulf Coast Business Council, I believe is what it's called. And he said by 2030, so within the next 7 years essentially, 7 out of 10 jobs are going to be careers that do not currently exist. So skill sets and whatnot that we are not using right now because of the technology. That's how rapidly it's evolving. So I think that's what they're kind of talking about too, right? Like instead of pushing people to become a housekeeper at a casino, why not push them to learn coding or geospatial design and mapping? Like why not learn how to do something like that? Because I mean, we're at a point now where technology is so prevalent, you can learn how to code on YouTube if you really wanted to, right? But just some people don't have access to those resources. So that's why I think the Coding Academy, being in East Biloxi, is pretty awesome.
Is that Code Academy like the website Code Academy?
Yeah.
The same Code Academy?
I believe so. Yeah, it's like the Gulf Coast Coding Academy.
Here with the what? Yeah, like, yeah.
Yeah, it just started, I think like last year, they just started taking applicants, but it's like an initiative that multiple people have had to get involved in to even get that off the ground. So, I mean, that goes to show you how stuck in the past South Mississippi is. When you have a guy who, he did a conference call with us, that's why we know a little bit about JoJo. He specifically said he chose South Mississippi because he wanted to bring higher paying jobs to this region because he's from here. So he went out, had to leave, become successful, become a CEO. Now he wants to bring some of that labor force here, but he still experienced resistance from city leaders that didn't fully understand what GeoJob even does. So if you have older people who don't even understand what the technology is making our decisions, how are we gonna move past it? So
Like, we don't understand GeoJob. He does, but like Sarah and I are like,
This is when I know I'm not that young
Mapping,
anymore because I'm
right.
like, I don't know what geodetic
with
is.
geospatial mapping,
sure, right, yeah.
essentially,
You all
Your 315 GPS when it's like a satellite, it's essentially mapping that in a way that like UPS can more efficiently deliver packages because they have a better idea of the topography of where they are. So stuff like that. So yeah.
So this, to honor Kevin behind the camera, no, we're way off, are we? So he's one of those young Mississippians, you're 32, can I disclose that? Who is educated here.
And all of my friends did move away except like 2.
He stayed, right?
Yeah.
And so he's working with development at Back Bay Mission and brings a lot to the table, right? And we want to keep him here.
Yeah. And this, I think these are the things we consider every year. Like we're working on that
Yeah.
right now. We've been here 100 years. We also have to look at what we're doing and does it make sense for the next 100 years. So I think we've all been talking about what our community strategy is
Yeah.
for next year in 2023. Have we seen the worst effects of COVID? We're talking about people that were in isolation for 2 years. What about the mental health?
Yeah.
And then there's this weird thing that's happening with addiction that more people are using statistically right now. Less people are
Less
accessing
people
rehab.
accessing rehab
Why?
services.
So it's usually there's a wait list to get in rehab. There's always beds now. You can always get a bed to get into rehab. Why are people not accessing? So we don't even know. We're actually researching, studying, and I'm kind of at the work about that kind of stuff. So we're trying to figure out the why so we can fix what we need to do. And what does Back Bay look like in 2023 to meet the needs? We're seeing 450 people a month in our food pantry. Unprecedented amounts, 250 housed, 200 homeless, 6 and 7 person families.
50% increase since February of this year.
Yeah.
So
So here's the question, because you're saying the resistance that you're meeting, like, where are you meeting that resistance politically? What are you trying to achieve, right, in terms of communication with local, municipality?
Well,
What needs to be communicated and how, where's the disconnect, I guess? is what it is.
we meet pretty regularly with our city council in Biloxi. We need to start doing that in Gulfport too. So it's kind of getting city council folks to say, yeah, we need this overnight shelter, which we need you to all advocate for us. That's our ask. It's when it comes to an overnight shelter, say yes, right? And if it's close to your backyard,
That's gonna be okay.
it's gonna be okay.
That's secure.
But I think part of it is working with the current political structure, right? The city, and then actually these forums that we're gonna have every quarter to allow people in the community to learn about homelessness. Now, we don't do this kind of presentation. It's more a panel of service providers and then a chance for them to holler and scream about homelessness, right? And then we say, but and we have the police chief there. So it's really collaborating. It's letting people know we're attempting to do something, right? We're doing the very best we can. But I think it's advocating within the community, building community, telling people and letting people know that homeless folks are us and we are them. And that when you see them standing on the side of the street with a sign or in front of, the market, you look into their eyes, you smile, you say, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. You acknowledge their humanity. Now, if they're going to ask you for something, you can say no, right? But I think part of it is acknowledging their humanity, treating them humanly as if they're us. So that's part of the narrative we want to change. And then getting people to say, yes, we need an overnight shelter. And an overnight shelter is not going to suddenly bring a greater number of homeless folks here. But we need something, right, that's going to provide
Reduce
housing.
trauma.
And reduce trauma for these folks. So I think part of it is, that's kind of our ask of you, You know, it's really not, we're not here to ask for money because we do have to ask for money at times, but it's really, we need your voice.
Yeah.
For you, because you're here because you want to learn something.
How would we best use that voice? Like specific example, what could I, what do you,
Thank you. I gotta get.
Thank
you. Hey, thank you.
like, who do I talk to? Right, somebody? Got a list?
City council,
City council,
the mayor,
the mayor,
the police department, which we do a lot of anyways.
and our police chief, at least in Biloxi, is really sensitive to the issue. We think he gets it.
They probably have to.
Yes, they both have homeless details now. So there's a task force on each, and the idea is not to arrest, because what are you gonna do with them? The jail won't take misdemeanors anymore. You have to have a felony or more, or the judge has to order you to jail for them to take you. So you're just sitting there and then you're out and you have all these warrants. It's like a reciprocal thing, right? So they actually both have a task force. Gulfport is a really cool thing. They actually have a fireman that's EMS trained, NCIT, which is crisis intervention training. So they have a fireman that goes out for medical with a police officer as well as a social worker. So they kind of have this whole, when they go out, it's like a team. It's such a cool thing. Biloxi's trying, they have they have a homeless task force. Same thing, connect them to services. Don't just call MCERT and tell somebody they're having a crisis and let them go. Bring them to Back Bay Mission, call the crisis teams. We'll be a safe place for not just the homeless, but also the crisis teams, because we want them to be safe too. So it's having those conversations. It's debunking the myths of what homelessness is and what it is not. Not everybody can just go out and get a job. Not everybody doesn't have income. I think it's advocating for affordable housing. I think that's going to be a huge piece here. While we have a low cost of living compared to other states, our housing is still going up. I mean, the apartments we used to pay $500, we're paying $800-900 for, which is actually outside of HUD's fair market rent. So some places we just can't even rent them because we're not allowed to. So I think it's advocating for affordable living, advocating for grocery stores and more places in poverty, especially you see East Biloxi has Food Giant. I think that's it.
Yeah, it's somewhat of a food desert.
Yeah, and then you can see pockets of poverty all over Harrison County. I think those are the neighborhoods we need to be in. Those are the neighborhoods we need to have these conversations. I see some places on Pass Road that have these beautiful new buildings and they're just really up and coming, but then I see so much poverty a half a mile down the road. So how do we even that out? So we don't want the rich to keep getting richer and the poor to keep getting poorer, and we have this huge middle class. We need to, I think, advocate for affordable living, better pay. We should, I don't know how you get the government to raise our minimum wage. It needs to come up.
Yeah.
There is a crisis in the home, but the wage goes up.
Yep.
Which actually did happen.
Yes,
Yep.
it did. Pay $5 per egg. Yeah. And I have 6 kids. I get it. They're all in the public school system. It was devastating the other day. I got a letter saying that I make too much money for free or reduced lunches. And I'm like, I literally pay almost $100 a week for food at school. And so you multiply that by 4, that's $400 a month for lunches for my kids. I feel that. Like I'm like, I make too much money. Like, what are you talking about? So and I don't make a small wage. So I can't imagine families that are making $25,000. I mean, food stamp workers make under $30,000 a year. It's just baffling me. The state of Mississippi is paying wages that are in the, I used to work at child support. I made $24,000 a year. And I had 1,500 people in my caseload. So, I mean, I cannot imagine still living on that wage and having my children. So it's really a hard thing.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, well, who are your counterparts in Hancock and Jackson County, and do you see the need for sort of what you do to be expanded?
Yeah, very much so.
Especially Ocean.
Yeah, and the housing rehab work we did about 65 homes in the last 8 months. We've done a lot of volunteers.
Familiar with Hancock Resource Center because I'm on the
Golf
board at
course.
Hancock Resource
Yeah.
Center, right? But
Yeah,
not.
yeah.
Jackson County doesn't really have much of anything.
And we just finished the plan in Jackson County, right, for homelessness. We attempted to, a collaboration of community members and agencies, but it kind of hasn't gone anywhere in Jackson County. But yeah, there's a need we don't, there's nobody that we collaborate with that does kind of what we do
Right.
or does everything that we do,
Right.
right? Everybody kind of has so we have to collaborate with a variety of community partners.
Yeah.
Like there really isn't anybody else doing the rehab work we're doing. There's not another day shelter anywhere else on the coast. Salvation Army is there, but they're understaffed and they haven't really completely opened the doors. We did just get Rebecca's House. You're familiar with the Rebecca's House? It's for homeless families. We just inherited the Rebecca's House from their board of directors. They said, we think Back Bay can manage it better. So that's going to be opening up soon.
Where's that located?
It's on Pine Lane, right off 90.
Yeah, right by Surf Style.
Surf Style. So we'll be able to have hopefully 3 to 4 homeless families there, which is a huge need, and they'll be there for 30 days to 90 days to kind of save money, gather their resources so that they can get out and do a sustainable.
Breathe for a minute. We actually had a woman the other day, we almost considered putting her in there. She has to have an emergency hysterectomy. And the doctor's like, I can't do it while you're homeless. You have to have a place to lay for a minimum of 2 weeks. And I'm like, 2 weeks after hysterectomy doesn't seem long enough, but, so we were actually gonna put her there just so she could have her emergency surgery. We have a man that's living with a stroke on her back, lived on her porch for 3 months. He's a veteran, only made $200 a month. There was no housing we could put him in. There's a year wait to get into senior housing, affordable senior housing, not all senior housing, but anything that's income-based is almost a year. Biloxi housing, I love them, they're great. There's not enough, there's just not enough. So he actually slept on our back porch after having a stroke for 3 months. Couldn't walk, he would just knock on the door and we would bring him stuff. Could not kick this man off the property, it was so sad.
Yeah.
So we actually housed him month to month now while we're waiting on his voucher to open up. At some point, we think it's going to open up. He's been denied. So we're actually fighting that right now for him. But yeah, he lived on our back porch for 3 or 4 months. We have 70 and 80-year-olds on our streets. I mean, we have a lot of senior citizens.
And honestly, a lot of our homeless here on the coast are white.
Males,
Males.
45 to 55.
Yeah.
That's our biggest age range.
And if you're couch hopping or living with other family members, that's not considered homelessness by definitions. So we're kind of at the end of our
We talked
past
about
9
a lot of
o'clock.
poverty stuff.
Yeah, so invite us back. We'll talk about time. But it's all, I mean, it's intersectional, right? All these issues are intersectional, poverty, homelessness, gender, all of that. So, yeah, so thank you for the chance to share with you. There's a lot. And I don't know I don't think we're experts, right? But we're trying to do the work we can, the best we can, and learning as we go. And trying to make those changes as we go. But you can advocate also by contacting HUD,
Yes.
and saying, hey, we heard that maybe the scattered site housing isn't the best, but more resources, right? And we're actually, we don't receive a lot of the funding on the coast. Other parts of the state receive that more funding. So, yeah, advocating for the coast.
And we have to live to that one coast. Like, we can't be
Yeah.
individual cities. We need to be a cohesive one coast.
Yep.
Not fighting over pockets of money. Like, we need to pull together. I think that's what we're seeing the most is collaboration is what's going to make the changes. It's not going to be Back Bay Mission on our own is going to make all these changes, and we're not going to solve homelessness and poverty on our own. It's going to have to be a community effort.
And the good news here is that we are collaborating on a lot deeper level. We are in the places we need to be.
Yep.
And we're getting people housed. We're repairing a lot of homes. And so our home repair is homeless prevention. So we're kind of homeless prevention and serving the homeless. So it's kind of the both, like our food pantry, our energy assistance. If you need an energy bill partially paid, all of that is a part of, we don't want you to be homeless. So what support nets do you need to keep you from becoming homeless? So that's the challenge. It's probably where we need to really emphasize our work is more how do we keep people from becoming homeless.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, we did, 65 houses in Gulfport. We've actually done, I think, about 15 homes in Moss Point as far as the air conditioning. So their homes are more livable and done some repairs on those homes. So it's really about whatever we can do to create more sustainability for individuals and for families. Because we're all in this together.
Yeah. So we recently heard through a financial expert that the bottom hasn't fallen out yet financially. But we're hoping by what do you say, about the end of the year, maybe?
Yeah.
We're going to see the worst of the worst. So we're trying to keep all those things in perspective when we think of next year. So like, we're going to have more in our food pantry. We're going to have to, we're doing 50 to 55 showers a day in the Micah Day Center. That used to be 20 to 30. So if you go into the Micah Day Center any day, you can look at every table and see a new homeless person. And the craziest thing they tell me is, oh, I had a bus ticket and I was going somewhere, but I got off here and it looked nice. I was like, okay, no plan, plan for that. But we also have a huge VA. We have a lot of draws for the Gulf. I mean, so for all that it's not, there's a lot of draw for the Gulf Coast and we're doing something good. And people literally come and say, I hear y'all have good services here, which is good and bad, right? We're bringing people, but it's also a testament to we're doing something right because people are coming specifically for it. So we hear a lot of that. Well, I heard y'all had good services here. I'm like, oh boy. So, and we've literally seen people drop them off on buses here. So it's just, when we send people home, I think we bought $900 worth of bus tickets in 3 months for people to reconnect with their families if they want to go home. People get stranded, they lost their wallets and can't get home. So we're big on, if you have a family, we will not turn you to homelessness. Do not. I have this guy that wants me to send him to a shelter in in Tennessee, and I'm like, no. So we have to connect you somewhere that's willing to take you. We're not going to create more homelessness somewhere else. So
So thank you.
thank you.
Thanks.
And is there any way could you email us a copy of